Daniel's horse kicked up plumes of dust as he rode through the barren frontier, the sun sinking low, painting the sky in dying shades of red. He wasn't searching for trouble, nor glory, just a quiet life away from the gunfights and shadows of his past, but peace was a fragile dream in the west. As he neared a canyon's edge, he spotted something that froze him, a figure lying twisted in the sand. At first, he thought it was death itself. Then, the faintest breath escaped her lips, pulling him down from his saddle in urgency. He rushed to her side, heart pounding. She was young, perhaps 23, with raven dark hair and skin bronzed by sun and struggle. Blood streaked her shoulder where an arrow had grazed, her breathing shallow but fierce, as if sheer will kept her alive. Her moccasins were worn, her dress torn by rough hands. Daniel didn't think. He simply lifted her into his arms. She was light, but her presence weighed heavy with untold stories. He guided his horse toward a shaded hollow where a spring trickled, whispering life into the desolate land. Daniel laid her gently against the cool stone, pulling water into his hands and dripping it against her parched lips. She stirred faintly, her fingers twitching as if reaching for something long lost. He tore strips of cloth from his own shirt, binding her wound, his rough hands uncharacteristically gentle. For hours he stayed by her side, feeding the fire, watching her chest rise and fall. The West was no place for mercy, yet Daniel found himself praying for this stranger's survival. Something in her defiance reminded him of himself. When dawn painted the canyon walls in gold, she opened her eyes. They were sharp, piercing, as though she saw both the man before her and the soul hidden beneath his scars. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Daniel pressed a waterskin to her lips, steadying her trembling hands. Finally, in broken English, she whispered, "You saved me." Her words carried both gratitude and weight, but before Daniel could reply, her eyes shifted, hardening, blazing with fire no wound could extinguish. Her voice sharpened into steel. "You saved me," she repeated, her tone lower. "But if you want me, cowboy, take my revenge." Her hand gripped his wrist with surprising strength, though her body trembled. "A man came to my people," she continued haltingly, "burned my home, killed without honor. He stole what cannot be returned." Her voice cracked, but her stare never wavered. "Make him pay." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of fire and the distant howl of coyotes. Daniel felt the gravity of her words, the plea, the promise, the bond forming in fire and blood. He studied her face, noting how grief and fury danced in her eyes like twin flames. He wanted to tell her he wasn't that man anymore, that the gunslinger in him had been buried years ago. But as her fingers clutched his, something deeper stirred in his chest. She was not asking for pity. She was offering a vow, a fate sealed by vengeance. Her last words struck like an arrow. "Take my revenge, and I will be yours forever." Daniel felt the desert air grow heavier, as if the land itself bore witness to her decree. The fire popped, scattering sparks into the darkness. Daniel leaned back, silent, trying to steady his mind. He thought of the countless graves behind him, of the men he had shot, of the blood that still clung to his hands no matter how hard he tried to wash it away. He had sworn to leave it behind. But now this woman, fierce even in her brokenness, was asking him to carry that gun again. Not for money, not for glory, but for justice. Her justice. And the price was her heart, promised in forever. Through the night, she told him fragments of her story. Her people had been ambushed while hunting. Near the river, the white outlaw who led the raid was a man without honor, a wolf who preyed on the weak. He had destroyed her home, scattered her kin, and left her bleeding in the desert to die. Daniel listened in silence, fists tightening as each word painted the man in clearer light. He didn't need to ask who. Every outlaw had a name whispered, in fear, and Daniel knew most of them, perhaps too well. When she grew weary, Daniel draped his coat over her shoulders, watching her drift into uneasy sleep. He stared into the fire, torn between his vow to walk away from violence and the fierce pull of duty rising inside him. For the first time in years, someone looked at him, not as a killer, but as a man capable of giving justice. The desert wind whistled through the canyon, carrying a promise only he could hear. In that moment, Daniel realized his journey for peace had ended. Fate had drawn him into another war. At dawn, the woman stirred again, stronger now, her spirit unbroken despite the weight she carried. Daniel saddled his horse, knowing there was no turning back. She sat by the fire, her gaze fixed on him with expectation and trust. He met her eyes, and though he said nothing, his silence spoke louder than words. She had asked for revenge, and Daniel had made his choice. As the first light spilled across the canyon floor, he tightened his holster and adjusted his hat. The cowboy was ready to ride not for himself, but for her. Daniel couldn't sleep for nights. The Apache woman's voice replayed in his mind, each word striking like an arrow. "Take my revenge, and I will be yours forever." He had saved her life, yes, but her wounds ran deeper than flesh. He knew her pain was carved into her soul, her people burned, her honor stolen, her heart scarred. Daniel had wandered the frontier seeking peace, yet here was a call he couldn't ignore. Was this justice or vengeance? The desert wind gave no answers, only silence, as he sat by the fire. Staring into the endless flames, the cowboy weighed his soul like a man holding gold dust in his palm. Revenge was not the path he had chosen in life. He had fought, he had killed, but only when forced. Yet now, before him, lay a request born not of greed, but of broken honor. He remembered her trembling lips, her tear-filled eyes, and the strength hidden beneath her sorrow. Could he walk away, knowing she would remain chained to her pain? Daniel rubbed the edge of his Colt, the metal cold, and knew the desert itself was demanding his decision. At dawn, he rose. His horse, a loyal bay with scars of its own, waited patiently, as if it knew the weight of its rider's choice. Daniel tightened the saddle, his face carved with resolve. The Apache woman stood at the canyon's edge, her hair loose in the wind, her figure sharp against the rising sun. She said nothing, only looked at him with those haunting eyes. Daniel tipped his hat to her, then turned his horse toward the horizon. The journey had begun not for himself, but for the justice she sought. Days passed in the relentless sun. Daniel tracked the outlaw's trail with the patience of a hunter. Dry riverbeds, broken branches, and whispers from frightened townsfolk guided him. Every mile reminded him of her words. A man stole my honor, burned my people's home. He imagined her family's cries, the fire devouring everything sacred, the cruel laughter of the man he now hunted. Daniel felt the anger grow within him, not for revenge, but for righteousness. The outlaw had to face judgment, and Daniel had become the instrument fate had chosen. By the third evening, Daniel found himself in a small frontier town. The saloon was buzzing with voices, but when his boots struck the wooden floor, silence spread. He asked for the outlaw, his voice calm yet edged with steel. A trembling bartender pointed toward the hills. "He's up there," the man whispered, living like a king in the rocks. Daniel nodded, sliding a coin across the bar. As he left, whispers followed him, some calling him brave, others calling him doomed. Daniel didn't care. His heart was no longer his own, it beat for her. The trail climbed into rocky terrain. Red cliffs loomed like silent judges, the sun burning low. Daniel's horse breathed hard, hooves scraping stone, but pressed on faithfully. Near the plateau, he saw smoke rising, campfire smoke. He dismounted, tying his horse in the shadows. Slowly, he approached, boots crunching gravel, and there he saw him, the outlaw, a man hardened by cruelty, broad shoulders cloaked in dust, a rifle resting in his lap. His eyes were sharp, dangerous, yet arrogant. He didn't see Daniel yet, but soon he would. The desert had brought them together for a reckoning. Daniel stepped forward, his silhouette cutting against the blood-red sky. The outlaw looked up, smirking. Well, he drawled, voice dripping with contempt. Another cowboy thinking he's got justice in his holster. Daniel said nothing. His hand hovered near his Colt, steady as stone. "You burned villages." He finally spoke, voice low but sharp. "You hurt those who never raised arms. Against you, this ends tonight." The outlaw chuckled, rising to his feet, rifle in hand. The desert grew silent, even the wind holding its breath, as two men prepared to decide fate. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with fire. Daniel's eyes locked onto the outlaw's, both men reading each other's souls in that instant. The outlaw sneered, his finger brushing the trigger. Daniel's world slowed, his heart beat steady, his breath calm, his purpose clear. The Apache woman's face flashed in his mind, not broken, but whole, waiting for freedom from her sorrow. And then, in a heartbeat, the desert erupted. Gunfire cracked like thunder, dust leaped from the earth, echoing through the canyons. When silence returned, only one man stood beneath the blood-red sky. Daniel holstered his Colt, his chest rising with deep, heavy breaths. The outlaw lay motionless, rifle fallen from his grip. The desert wind stirred again, carrying away the last echo of violence. For Daniel, there was no triumph, no pride, only a weary stillness. Justice had been delivered, but at a cost that could never be undone. He mounted his horse, the trail back to the canyon, stretching long before him. Yet with every mile, he felt lighter, as if he carried not only his burden, but the weight of her sorrow lifted as well. When Daniel returned to the canyon, dawn was breaking. Golden light washed the rocks, softening the harsh desert. The Apache woman stood waiting, her figure radiant against the morning glow. She saw the dust on his clothes, the weariness in his eyes, and without a word, she knew. Tears spilled as she reached for his hand, her touch tender yet trembling. "You have given me justice," she whispered, her voice breaking like fragile glass. "And now I am yours forever." Daniel closed his eyes, realizing this was not the end of his journey, but the beginning of something greater.